foundation relations at the college, and Judy is academic. And so they are in different areas of the college and different faith traditions, and they will talk to us about that experience.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So we're asked to talk about a Mennonite and a Catholic getting married and what kind of fireworks that might have caused. I told Richard just before we started up here that really this is more his story than mine, because so many of you would be familiar with my story. I grew up in Goshen. I was the daughter of a faculty member and grew up Mennonite. So at least for the Mennonites in the group, that would be a pretty familiar story here in Goshen. Not loud enough? Oh, sorry. Okay. So I was saying, my story would be fairly familiar. Somebody once talked to me about intercultural marriages, when two people marry from different cultures, even from different countries, that the most successful marriages are when one of the partners adapts most. That you don't usually see marriages where it's sort of a half and half adaptation. And I think that's true for our intercultural marriage, that Richard is the one who came further and I didn't have to make as far a journey. So I will let him talk more about the journey that he's made and why he was willing to do it and how he did that, to come more toward the Mennonite way of life than for me to go toward, because also we're Anglo and Hispanic, so there was that dimension also. And I'm telling you that also because I'm going to have to duck out of here in about 20 minutes, so Richard will probably wrap up the story. My job is academic counselor. I meet with the students who are struggling the most, and there's this one student I've been trying to get into my office for 4 weeks now, and he says he's coming today. He promised, so I do not want to be late. I'm going to be there and talk to this guy. So anyway. We have been married 30-something years. Yeah, we married in 1982. We have 2 grown children who both happen to be in the Goshen area right now, although they occasionally wander off to other places, but right now they're around. And I'm a graduate of Goshen College. Richard's a graduate of Fresno State University in California. He grew up in California. So we had a lot of stuff to learn and put together in a marriage, growing up in different parts of the country, growing up in different kinds of cultures, and growing up with different religions. And the word that he keeps using when we talk about coming here and talking to you is how improbable this all was. So I'm going to let him say a little more about all that.
And I'll jump ahead to what might be, for some people, the most intriguing part of the story, because I would consider that being Catholic is part of my DNA. And I don't think I could extract that, despite the fact that I've now worked for almost 9 years at this Mennonite college. But the part that's even more improbable about marrying a Mennonite and working at Goshen College for me is that on Monday I went to my first meeting as an elder of Berkey Avenue Mennonite Fellowship. And as I was there, I kept thinking to myself, is this a dream? How is this possible? Why am I here? But I'll get to that in a minute. But as I said, having been a cradle Catholic, that's the only faith tradition my family, my grandparents, had ever been part of. But as I'll mention, there are a couple of things that probably made it more likely this could have happened when we met than not. And one of those is, although we participated in all of the sacraments of the Catholic Church and went to church every Sunday, and if you haven't known, I mean, the Catholic Mass is beautiful, not only in what it means and how you are transformed when you're there, and the symbolism, but also because you can go there and know every Sunday kind of what's going to happen, And you can go to a Catholic Mass anywhere in the world, and it's pretty much the same. And the thing about the Universal Catholic Church, is what it's called, is it draws everyone together from all over the world. So you can truly be with people of all strata of society. You can be with people from your neighborhood or from distant. And if you're not in town, you go to the church wherever you're visiting. And that really is a beautiful part of the church. What Judith and Ken both referred to, a hierarchy, a leadership of the church, is also something that gives you some stability and comfort. You know that the priest is going to be there Sunday after Sunday, that a bishop is going to be there until he retires or dies, and the same for the Pope. And you grow up knowing it was Pope Paul, it was Pope John Paul, briefly, John Paul II, and then Benedict, and now Francis. So you know all these things, and that does help in terms of knowing what you're required to do, what your obligations are, and especially your obligations to others. And I know that when I was a little kid and had my first communion, and it was a very transformative experience to know that I could go and with sincere belief and confess to the priest and then receive my communion, and my sins were washed away. And I would walk away just feeling how wonderful this was. And then by the next Friday night, I'd think, wow, I have a lot to talk about now with my priest. But we were never, in my family, my Latino family, we were never, would you call, a part of a specific parish. There were 3 churches in our city that we would regularly go to, and there was kind of no rhyme or reason. My dad always wanted to sit in the back because he needed a cigarette break, and he always wanted to see the priest that would teach say the shortest homily. That was important to him to get out of there. But we didn't really ever become part of the church community. And that was something that you don't know you're missing something unless you don't have it. You never had it, right? So we didn't hang around the parish hall. We didn't know the priest except to shake his hand. He really probably didn't know my name or my brothers and sisters' names. And only later did I realize how sad that was, that we didn't have that intimate relationship. But in another way, that's why I think I gravitated eventually toward a church tradition where you get to know people a little bit more. And that's what I like so much about the Mennonite Church. The other thing that I think made it easier for us to get together is I grew up as a kid with a strong identification that the way minorities were treated was not right. That there were basic issues of social justice that we were not benefiting from. I had a sister who went out and hung out with a United Farm Workers Union and Cesar Chavez for a while. My dad would come and talk about the difficulties he faced and the discrimination he faced. And when the Catholic Church was preaching, theologians, liberation theology, that really, really appealed to me. The fact that we didn't have to accept the way the world was, that the poor were as important as anyone else in God's kingdom. But when John Paul II became Pope, he cracked down on those theologians because he thought that drifted into communism. I'm not going to debate that here. There's a very reasonable point of defending what the Pope did. But to be honest, that really turned me off. That there was so much more of an emphasis on contraception and abortion than on the death penalty and social justice. So that's just my view. Ken might take issue, but that's how I felt about it. And I remember during the first Gulf War, I was in a Catholic church in Sacramento, and the Monsignor was saying we had to support the war, we had to support the soldiers, and that they had to go over there and do away with those bad people. And that blew me away, because I knew the Pope had been speaking against that war. So I went up to the Monsignor after the Mass, and I confronted him, which was very difficult to do. And I said, I hope you regain the faith of the Pope someday, because when you are preaching war that is against what a Catholic priest should be doing, he refused to acknowledge me, and he turned away and said, I'm not going to talk to you. That was a very pivotal moment in my faith journey in wondering whether I could remain a Catholic. Judy can talk now about some difficulties or differences we had when we were going to get married.
Wow. I don't know if you're ready for all of them, but anyway. I met Richard in California. So after I graduated from Goshen College, I went out to California where my parents had moved. And I was applying to graduate schools, and I knew that I wouldn't be around a Mennonite community like Goshen maybe ever again. And that actually helped. I was a member of I was a member of College Mennonite Church at that time. This is where I was baptized and joined, and wanted to continue to be a Mennonite. But I was actually kind of okay with seeing what else was out there in the world. And there were no Mennonite churches in Santa Barbara where I went, where my parents were. And I met Richard. He was a reporter at the newspaper in Santa Barbara, and I did an internship at the newspaper, so I was exploring that possibility of a career. And then I didn't keep the career, but I kept him. I was assigned to job shadow him. That's how we met. And then we started dating, and Santa Barbara's this beautiful place if you've ever been out in California. Great place to meet, and we married and started our family there. But being away from the Mennonite community, I think that for me is probably what made it easier to think, well, I'm not around Mennonites anyway, and I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I ever will be. I sure never thought I'd come back to Goshen. And now here I am, I'm back. We had a pretty quick courtship. I don't know why we did it so fast. I guess we just liked each other and felt pretty sure about that. But putting our families together for a wedding, that was when we started to go, well, we really have some cultural differences here. For example, at that point, I think I had been to one wedding once where there was alcohol served. But to me, that wasn't a wedding thing. Why would you have alcohol at a wedding, right? That's just weird, right? And of course, Richard had never been to a wedding where there wasn't the keg and the champagne and all the toasts and all that kind of thing. And so for his family to understand, and my sister made her wedding dress, and I didn't know anybody who had been married in one of those long white flowy things, and that was just the tradition, and maybe it was also the times, because that would have been the 80s when we met and married. I came from a much simpler tradition. You had to get used to the idea that I didn't want an engagement ring. Like, why wouldn't you want an engagement? Well, no, nobody I knew had an engagement ring. You got a gold band, but that was kind of flashy even. My parents got their gold bands after we were all born. Okay, so you can get the idea. And then Richard's family was used to really a big party. The Latino community has a huge party, and he has a huge family.
With music and dancing.
Music, dancing, right. I didn't know how to dance. I was Mennonite. I went to Bethany before dancing was allowed, and Goshen College before dancing was allowed. So, and now I'm supposed to dance in front of your whole family? I said, no, I'm not going to dance. And his family was sort of shocked, like, why wouldn't you dance at your wedding? Are you not happy about the wedding? So we did have to talk to each other's families quite a bit and help them understand how different our traditions were. And those ceremonial kind of times are when you really see it. But it's there also in your life and the way you communicate and the kind of expectations you may have. So we've always had to talk a lot about all of that. And I guess the wedding was kind of a good crash course in and what that all might mean. And it was a joyous occasion. And I didn't dance. I don't think I did at all. Did I? I don't know. Which they just couldn't understand. But I think they learned early on that Richard was marrying this kind of strange, quirky person who did things differently. And I allowed for there to be champagne. We did have champagne, and we had a mariachi band play. And so since then, I've been to many weddings in Richard's family, and I've learned to dance, or I've learned that they don't care how I dance, right? I mean, it's a celebration. And now I wish I could go back and dance at my wedding. I wish I had done it. But I've danced at many other weddings, so I'm making up for it, right? Yeah. And it was a joyous occasion. It wasn't without its misunderstandings, and I do think that when two people marry, they're always bringing two cultures together anyway. Of those who are married, would you agree? I mean, you have two family cultures, if nothing else, and so it's just maybe a little bigger scale the way our marriage was. And we didn't get married in the Catholic Church. That was where the religious part of it became a big question. And we didn't baptize our children in the Catholic Church. Those two things really asked Richard's family to come a ways, to travel a distance that they never thought they might have to do. But I'm not the only non-Catholic in the family either. And are you the only Catholic in our family? I don't know. I think, yeah, he's probably the only Catholic in my family, but there are non-Mennonites in the mix. We're a much more diverse family than we thought we would be. You know, growing up, we thought we'd all marry white Mennonites, and that hasn't been the case, so.
After we got married, we chose to worship at a boys' seminary in Santa Barbara that was not a recognized parish. They had this seminary for boys, and it was embracing of divorced Catholics, single Catholics, Catholics who had fallen out with the Mennonite Church, with the Catholic Church. And what was real interesting about it, they would have, as opposed to the Catholic the Church, they would have just like mimeograph sheets, you know, of the order of the service and the songs. Didn't have songbooks. That was the first time I'd ever been to a mass that didn't have that. But I thought that also very much appealed to me in the spirit of this group was closer than I'd ever been to any other traditional mass. And I think that's when I started to feel that there could be different worship practices that could be as beautiful as the mass. We then moved around quite a bit, and during that period, living in Dallas, Texas, Visalia, California, one time we moved in Goshen for a year, then moved back to California. In fact, one funny thing about that is Hank and Mary, Judy's folks, bought a surplus piano from Goshen College, and it was at their home in Carter Road for many years. And then they moved to California with that piano. And then Judy inherited that. That piano went to Dallas, Texas from Santa Barbara. It went to Goshen, back to Goshen, went back out to California, went to Oregon. It's back here, and we have both said that piano's not moving. It's going to stay where it is. It'll go with the house if we ever leave it, or the next owners will have to deal with it one way or another.
We probably should add that we moved that much because Richard's career was as a journalist, and journalists just do move a lot. So in all those places that we lived, I usually found a Mennonite church or something as close to a Mennonite church as I could find. So we didn't after St. Anthony's in California, we didn't regularly attend a Catholic church. And Rich will tell you a little bit about what was happening with his faith at that time. But basically, I was the one who took our children and went to Mennonite churches. This was new for me, was to go alone. I didn't know couples where only one person of the couple went to church and the other one didn't. And sometimes I felt weary of carrying that load, of making sure our children were getting the kind of exposure I hoped that they could have. But on the other hand, it was never a question of, are we going to raise them as Catholic or Mennonite? Because at that time, Richard was going through some other things and disillusioned with the Catholic Church. So our kids were basically raised Mennonite. And strangely enough, one of the things, did you guys ever see The Waltons? Do you remember The Waltons? The Waltons was my grandma's favorite TV show. And in The Waltons, the husband didn't go to church with the wife. Do you remember that? That actually helped me. It was like, well, okay, I don't know anybody in my community like me, but I'm kind of like the Waltons, you know. I'll take my kids and go to church, and I was never worried about Richard, so I knew he'd figure it out. And sooner or later, he ended up in a Mennonite church. So you see, he figured something out.
And I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'll just say that the other dynamic in my life was that I spent 23 years as a journalist. And if there's a more unchurched group, I haven't found them. And if there's a more cynical group, I also haven't found them. So there was a lot of that. In my workplace, it was considered strange to express any kind of faith belief. And when you see so much of the bad part of life, I was involved in coverage of abuse of children by priests. In fact, St. Anthony's Seminary, where we had preached and loved that experience so much, ended up being, it's no longer church, it's no longer seminary, because about 4 of the priests had been molesting boys. And the church had to sell that property to satisfy the court judgments. And then I was aware of it in other states that I lived in. I won't say that's a motivating factor. I will just say it is something that really weighed on my mind a lot. And as well as the politics of Benedict and his predecessor, that I just couldn't go there. So I was, through that period, someone called a cafeteria Catholic. Derisively, we're called that when we pick and choose what we believe in. Papal infallibility, I'll pass on that. Another belief, I'll take that. But I felt unsettled through that whole time. And I'd have to say that although I prayed regularly, although I occasionally went to the church, it wasn't until we came to Goshen that I felt more comfortable moving closer to Judy. And that's why we visited various churches here. And I always thought that was intriguing. There's 14 Mennonite churches around here. Why does somebody go to Berkey as opposed to Assembly, as opposed to College or 8th Street? It's just by chance. I remember asking one person, why didn't you go to Assembly? You seem to like that, what they preached there. And he said, there was a person who brought a dog, and I didn't like that. And that was it. It wasn't God that motivated him, it was dog. But we eventually found our home at Berkey Avenue Mennonite Fellowship, and maybe Lori can attest, we just stayed there and have really liked it. And we're now in both, Judy's on the Carrying Commission, and I was surprised as anyone when I got a call from a church member and said, you've been nominated for the spiritual leadership team, and would you be willing to have your name put forward? And I was half expecting or hoping maybe that the little affirmation vote would not go my way, and but it did. And so I'm really looking forward to serving in that and being part of a group that decides by consensus, which is also something I'm not used to. At the meeting Monday, I said, am I supposed to make a motion now? And they said, no, we don't do that here. So that's an adjustment, and I think I'll get used to it.
Yeah, I want to say goodbye. I'm going to go meet my student, and I'll let Richard answer questions and make any further comments.
And if you have questions for Ken also, Judith?